No, not me. I just want to say that the title of the book is Building a Liberal Europe, and as you may have seen from the construction work underway here at the university, we like builders. And this is actually the book of a builder in two respects, ideas and people. So I'm going to keep the level of the discussion around ideas and people. Very often when we look at the activity of the European Parliament as political scientists, we focus on the behavior of MEPs in the lawmaking. We look at roll call voting and other important aspects of the life of the EP, but obviously there is the other dimension, which is a more an ideational or ideological dimensions to build ideas around Europe and around the federation of very different parties. And you can see in the book, step by step, how the Liberal Democrats in Parliament found their own way. I think one element to stress here is the distinction that you make, and as was done by many of your MEPs, between, let's say, the tabloid version of a neoliberalism that is seen also in some academic quarters as a kind of a tank attack on every type of regulation, reduction of budgets and permanent austerity, and indeed the liberalism that you envisage as an ideology. Early in the book, on page 17, there is a revealing passage when Santer promises to do less but better and to deregulate, and I guess a reader informed by the tabloid version of neoliberals will say, okay, that's very good for probably the MEPs of what then was the European Liberal Democrats. But instead you say we have many reservations. We had, at least some of us, reservations on these deregulatory agendas and on the better regulation package of the Commission, because we thought that, very honestly, the problem was one of implementation and compliance in the member states, and so the problem was down at the level of member states rather than the ideology, which is very easy to sell, of red tape and too much legislation coming down from Brussels. Obviously, like a politician, this is a very important statement, because you have to balance ideology on the one hand and the votes that you get, especially in the southwest of England, on the other hand. To carry on with ideas, far in the book, on page 177, you go back to the idea of the community of peace, the Kantian community of peace as ideal for Europe, adding the green dimension, and I think that's important, and Susan may want them to ask questions about you and the Greens in Parliament. But also there is a whole set of things that I must say as a political scientist I don't usually study, which is the EU as, in this case the European Parliament, a producer and exporter of norms. And that's again another interesting activity of the European Parliament in terms of individual liberties, of activities on the world scene, up to the point of the European Parliament bringing forward an initiative for a UN moratorium on death penalty. That's something that, for the classic political scientist at least, is not the immediate focus of activity of the European Parliament, not to mention the reports on human rights in the world, on Tibet, and the 40 signatures of members of the European Parliament taken to Moscow to protest against the attempt to not allow the gay pride to take place in Moscow. So this is a very interesting activity of, I said, ideas, ideology, neoliberals, and also creating the norms in which, in a sense, the EU becomes, yes, a community of peace, but also a community with concrete values and not just peace for the sake of being, or not being at war. So it's something more positive than the negation of war. A few words on people. Obviously, this is yet again, as you can see in the book, step by step building the numbers, getting up to 88 to 90, for example, in 2004. And often it means chasing individuals or chasing very small representations in Parliament, or small contingents and pockets of MEPs with their own national traditions and national problems. But it's also, in a sense, if you look optimistically at the book, is an attempt to reinvent the left-right divide at the European level. Obviously, these two concepts are very confused, blurred, and elusive at the national level nowadays, but throughout the book, at least, you can see how perhaps at the European level can help to overcome the classic thinking about the left-right divide, and this is very clear in terms, again, of citizens' rights rather than bureaucracies and welfare state intervention for its own sake, competition policy. In a sense, it's a kind of liberal agenda that, at least according to some economists, put liberalism on the left instead of, or liberal socialism or third way. I mean, there are many different colors from Lithuania to Spain and Italy in your book, but it's clearly the European Parliament, and your group in particular, is the place where these very ambitious attempts to recreate the categories at the EU level, hoping then to influence also the political scene, are being made. And that's an important step. I'll finish with essentially two dilemmas, perhaps the only questions I have. One is that if you have to work with these ideas and people in an ambitious way, and also make up the numbers and not end up as three people feeling very sorry for themselves, as you said earlier on, there is a dilemma between trying to reflect consensus, which always is the old story of the least common denominator as the only way forward in the EU, and instead a kind of method that I would describe as creating campaigns on specific issues and go for trans-party majorities, even beyond it. That's why I go back to the Greens and the Green Agenda for Europe, especially on human rights. There was very clear on episodes like opium in Afghanistan and Africa, where the liberal Democrats are not just the liberal Democrats, and they go out and try to create a majority in Parliament. Another example, the moratorium on death penalty of the United Nations. Obviously, you can't have both, and it's a tough choice, I think. The other dilemma is one that has been also academically studied recently between economic reform and institutional reform. We heard in the past people like Santero, Bolkestein saying we go back to the core business of the EU, we do economic reform, institutional reform can occur, but maximum within the limits of something like the Treaty of Lisbon. In your book, I see the two going together, and even some of your sentences are somewhat provocative for the standard political scientist. There is a photo where you have our commissioners, the liberal commissioners, and that again, if you stay by the treaties, you stand by the treaties, the commissioners are this kind of neutral bureaucracy that is not colored. It's more the vision that you propose, the vision of people like Simon Hicks, where they think that we could also vote for the president of the commission, probably on a left-right divide or on a specific manifesto and menu of policies. So I wonder what your feelings are about the possibilities and probably the impossibility of separating out economic reform and institutional reform.
Thanks a lot. I think Professor
Well, do you want my comments or a response, or?
I think
you choose. I'm
you choose.
probably
Because I'll follow up on, as I will, as you might expect from me, on electoral questions. So, if it's more appropriate to give a response to
Okay,
sort of the more
then,
ideational policy
Let
perspective
me
that
try
Claudio
a couple of
brings.
responses. Firstly, growing the Liberal group. When I took over from my predecessor, Pat Cox, who became the President of the European Parliament, only the second time we'd ever managed to get a Liberal President of Parliament. It's normally shared out between the European People's Party